Hi everybody, welcome to LaraChat episode number 12 finally. So we've got Alfred, Dylan, and Mike here, and we've got Matt Lance who is having some audio issues, so he might pop in and out until he gets that sorted. So bear with us as we sort that out. So most of you who watch the show know who Alfred is, and you've seen Dylan before. But how about you guys give another quick overview, some updates of what you've been up to since the last time you've been on. So we'll start with Alfred.
Hey, just still doing a lot of Laravel work, and I'm actually writing a book for Packet Press. I'm on chapter 10 of 10, and a long road ahead though when you go over it again to re-edit it. So a lot of work there. Just some basic recipes in Laravel, like I forget the number, but a ton of recipes, like little things like how to use Angular widgets and how to do these little things that we do day to day.
That's really interesting. Is there like a sample or somewhere to
They're
see?
not. I should have asked about that. I haven't really taken the lead in that stuff because it's it's another company I'm doing it for. If it was mine, I would have done that. But if you get the book, you get like LaraChat, LaraCast, a discount there and stuff like that. So it should be good there. So we'll see.
Okay, so once it's somewhere for us to see, let us know and we'll broadcast it out to everybody.
Man, books are a lot of work.
And Dylan, what's up with you?
Hi. So the last time we talked, I was leaving my job and I was working on my smart mirror. And at first it was a Laravel app with widgets on it powered by React, and then I landed a contract with a toy manufacturer. So now I'm making smart mirrors for education, early childhood education. I haven't done Laravel in a while. Kind of miss it.
Oh, I wonder if we should kick you off the show here.
Hey, I still keep tabs on it.
Fair enough. And you and I were talking earlier. You were sharing some of the stuff you were working on, and I said we needed to invent some kind of hose where I could hook my brain up to yours and suction all the knowledge into mine. And like, there's some really cool things you were working on. So, and then you talk about some exciting things that are coming down the pipeline, which I won't broadcast yet because I'll let you do it. Not today though, but look forward to what Dylan is going to be doing. And then Matt, I hope your audio issues have been resolved, and we've got Mike. Everybody knows who you guys are. If you've got any updates of what you guys have been working on lately, please feel free to shout it out. No, I guess not. Same old for those guys. They don't change.
Nose to the grind, working on a couple packages here and there, but mostly work stuff, so not much free time.
Yeah, I've been trying to get into some of the package development myself, but time, it doesn't exist for me that much.
My Oculus Rift just came in, so it's all going to end after this.
Wow, that's awesome. Your rig can handle that?
It could be bad for productivity.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I have a bucket just in case.
I was going to ask, how is the nausea?
We will see. I just set it up, so I'm not sure yet.
Oh, I thought that was for Pete.
Live demo. Let's see how long he lasts.
So let's get into the next part of the latest news. So some of the things we know about LaraCon is coming up on, what is that, the 27th? 27th to the 29th. That's 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. Are any of you guys going? I'm not going. I wish I could, but... So we got Mike.
You on, Mike?
Yeah, I'm going this year. I wanted to go so bad last year, but this year I made it. Booked the hotel and ready to go.
Awesome.
I think I'm going to try and make a strong effort to save up and go next year. How about any of you guys?
I couldn't find anybody to go with this year. I posted on Reddit, I posted on Twitter, I posted on Slack, and nobody was really interested. Next year.
I hate traveling. I'll do it in the Oculus Rift, but that's it. But I do. Are they streaming it? It's like $25 and you can stream, or what was it?
Yeah, I saw something like that. They're going to have live streaming tickets.
That's great. That's awesome. It's not the same, but it's if you don't want to go or can't go, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that. I saw something about it, but I gathered it was for U.S. people only. Like there were some restrictions there, but most of us know how to work a VPN to get around that. But I think I'll be, I'd be happy to pay $25 to follow it. Just streaming. I'd be happy to if it was free, but $25 it would be worth it.
You should make a private Slack room and charge for it. There you go.
Last year, many of the sessions went on YouTube like a week or two later for free. So maybe they'll do that again this year.
Yeah, one of the things we've been talking about is what to do with regard to Slack, and this is probably not a topic for today, but we only have a 10,000 message limit, so things go away fast. So we've been talking about different things, from some kind of bot where it could track the history, but we've got larachat.slackarchive.io, and there's an ongoing archive of all of the channels. The downside is it's not in Slack. You have to go to the browser and look at all that data to go back in time and history. It doesn't track private messages, which I think a lot of people would like to keep, and some people are talking about cool concepts and how to do certain things, and that history's gone. But just for anybody out there listening, the yearly cost for us to turn into a paid plan with Slack is $190,000 based on our active users. So if anybody wants to sponsor us for $190,000, please get in contact. I don't think anybody out there is that generous, but you gotta try, right?
Well, what you've heard of Reactiflux? It's the React and Flux equivalent of LaraChat. They have the same problem, and they just moved to Discord. They just migrated everything to Discord. I'm not sure if it completely solved their problem, but that's what they did.
We were discussing that a little bit, and I think one of the fears we have is fragmenting the community. Are we going to lose too many people in the move? We'll have a free tier there for sure, and unlimited usage, I think, right? But yeah, I don't know. What do you think? How did their move survive it?
Well, one thing I want to interject here with regards to what my understanding is with it, what happened is Slack came to them and said, hey, you guys are too large, using up too many resources, so we need to, we're going to block any registrations. And I don't remember how many users they were, but I know we've blown past that number. And this was before they had their, $3 billion valuation and all their investment into the company. So they didn't have the money and the resources at the time to handle it. But I think my assumption, based on what I've heard and what I've read, is they got shut down because too many resources too early in the game, where LaraChat has kind of had a slow, steady growth. And a friend of mine who down in San Francisco had a meeting with the Slack companies, and they talked to them about LaraChat and other Slack communities out there. And Slack the representative at that meeting said that Slack was really supportive of these communities. But yeah, there's always there's limitations with the $10,000 message limit, the limitations with regard to how many apps we can integrate, bots and so forth. So whether we go into a paid tier at any point in time, I don't know what the future holds. I'm happy to stay with where we are and use it as kind of a chat board, and if the history goes, then the history goes. Everybody there is tightly integrated with some of my company Slack channels and other Slack channels, so moving to Discord would mean another app, and there's a big fear of losing people that don't want to migrate over. Yes, go ahead.
I think a major factor. Wait. Okay.
Your audio shot.
No.
The USB, plug it in, plug it out. You want all Cylon.
Sorry. sound like an android. It's kind of cool.
It was cool though.
Yeah. All right. Well, Matt, we'll move on from that. Let's get back to the real topic. We were talking about the news. Some of the other things. So we talked about LaraCon. iOS 10 went to a public beta today. I haven't upgraded my iPhone. I don't know if any of you guys are iPhone users or if you've upgraded. No. No. If anybody's out there, it's public beta.
Yeah.
Mac OS.
That's just a thought about iOS 10 is everybody's raving about Swift Playground for the iPads. It could be fun to play around with, you know.
I'm also scared of breaking my device because in previous developer betas sometimes it would do that.
So that's the one at the Worldwide, the WDCC. It was that lady on the stage, and it was the kids.
Yeah, but I hear a lot of adults using it too. They enjoy it. You know, it's not going to teach you heavy programming, but it's an interesting concept, and you can make playbooks, so you can actually make higher level, things.
Oh, that's cool.
But definitely for kids though too.
And then, Mike, you were talking about Mac OS 10.2 public beta that you're using.
Yeah, the 10.12. I actually ran it right when it came out the next day. It's kind of a tradition with me on that. I've done that for the past 3 years now, and I want to see how much I can break. But this has been relatively good. There are some key issues. Safari is very, very laggy. It has caching and performance issues. Some apps, especially OpenVPN apps, don't really work well, if at all. Most apps work. Just there are some that here and there that don't, but for the most part they do.
Okay, that's interesting. I also saw on Hacker News, I think it was Hacker News, is Safari the new IE? Based on what you said.
I hope they fix it before it releases. Otherwise, yeah, it'll be like a Vista.
And then another piece of news, Webpack is coming to Elixir. Dylan, you told me about that. So tell me a bit about what's going on there that you know about.
So I know that Jeffrey Way is the guy behind moving away from Browserify and towards Webpack on Elixir. So if you prefer Elixir's API, which is really simple and easy to use, then it's great news because Webpack is immensely more configurable than Browserify and faster. And you have the ability to do hot reloading, which will compile your JavaScript or JSX or whatever you're using nowadays into real JavaScript without refreshing the page or without, going back to your terminal, running Webpack or Browserify, and then refreshing the page. Like it happens automatically, which was like a dark magic before, and hopefully he brings that in soon.
Now, isn't that going to be transparent to the user? He still can use the Browserify command, I think. He's just changing the underlying architecture to use Webpack instead of Browserify. Isn't that right?
Yes. So what Elixir kind of does is it adds a layer on top of these transpilers, so you can use the same methods. And instead of saying .browserify, you'd say .webpack, and you follow the same methods you know how to do, like input output. Input these JSX, output to this specific file.
Cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. If you're into the front end, crazy stuff. It's getting crazier and crazier all the time.
Sweet. So let's jump into our first topic of the day, which was managing very large databases effectively. I think some of us have some experience with databases of varying sizes, but once you run into, in my mind, there's two kinds of concepts of very large databases. One with a lot of data. Another one is ones that scale across different clusters, sharding, all that kind of stuff. And the data there can be really small or can be really large. I think what I wanted to discuss a bit more was, first and foremost, let's say, is with regard to databases that are very large in size, lots of records. Maybe perhaps it's a legacy database that millions of records have gone in. How do we optimize that? How do we improve the speed? How do we handle it? How do we refactor it? Do we perhaps taking a database that has its, let's say, MySQL, has its engine as MyISM to InnoDB? Lots of different things that we can talk about. But first and foremost, I'm curious about, Dylan, you said you had some experience with it. Maybe share some personal experiences with some large databases you've had to handle and perhaps some things you had to do to improve or make it hum better.
Sure. So not too long ago, I was a programmer on a project that tracked social media across the country. Like, it was importing all day long from different sources, and it had a system where you could reply inside of it. And this thing had a lot of input-output, like all day. And MySQL, the MySQL hosted on the web server couldn't handle it. And we moved to Aurora at first. If you guys have heard of Aurora, it's part of Amazon Web Services. It's Postgres, but it has the same API as MySQL. So you can plug it into a Laravel app or anything that runs MySQL, and it will act the same, but Amazon has optimized it underneath, so it runs way faster than MySQL, which is really cool. So that's the cheapest way to do it in terms of like developer complexity. You just migrate over to Aurora and then point your web app towards it. And then you can talk, if you're talking about really lots of data, then I've used Redshift in the past. And Redshift is also an Amazon service that is a large data warehouse, but it also follows Postgres API somewhat. There's some things you can't do, but that's for storing like terabytes and terabytes of data, and you could still retrieve it moderately fast.
You mentioned Aurora. Is there a database engine that it works with? Going back to MyISM, InnoDB, one of the things with a project I'm working on is a legacy one, and MyISM is the engine, and it's not transactional. And with regard to that, we want to consider upgrading to, or not upgrading, changing to MyISM. But there's a lot of fears of corrupting the data or going down a rabbit hole that's just crazy to even think about. So I'm curious, when we talk about migrating to the Amazon service, is there an engine? Would you think that would factor in?
That's a really good question.
If it's Postgres, it would have to be InnoDB, right? Because that's the more modern way, and Postgres is always, it's only MySQL was my, I don't know where I just heard this, but basically only MySQL was like lame enough to have that other option. And Postgres has always been like, it seems like way ahead of MySQL. I wish I got into it a long time ago. So I think it would be InnoDB or whatever. But you could just use RDS on Amazon as well and get that, like Dylan's saying, that instant access to this resource that can be your database scale up and down quite easily with very little developer overhead.
Yeah, I wish I could answer your question, but you'd have to dive into their docs and see what engines they support. I just know that I was using a modern MySQL database. It wasn't legacy by any means, and I just switched to Aurora. It was pretty much painless. It was great.
That was really cool that they did that. I didn't realize it was Postgres underneath. That was really brilliant for Amazon to do.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you're tied to the vendor, but I mean, you can't possibly not. I don't know. It's all right. Amazon's not going anywhere.
Why? And I wonder, like why not use Postgres over MySQL? Is there a reason why? It seems like in the end, MySQL seems to fall short in so many areas. And I'm just wondering, is there a reason why to use it over Postgres ever, other than familiarity?
So you're asking anybody or me in general in terms of my...
Yeah, anybody who has any thoughts about that.
Well, I'll start. For me, using MySQL just based out of being familiar with it. I do have experience with Postgres, and I really should. I know better, but sometimes it's just so easy to quickly spin up a MySQL database and go with it. But like I said, I know better. I feel shameful now. Thank you, Alfred.
No, I do the same thing. I'm like, why don't I use MySQL when I was like, man, in Laravel's extracted it away with Eloquent that the hurdle wouldn't be too high, and with
Right.
Homestead and all these other things.
You still have to administer it because their user scheme is totally different from MySQL.
Yeah, but what does that, for me, what does that mean? It's like my Ansible file builds it, or not my Ansible, AWS will build it for me, and I just use it, right?
Yeah.
So, and Homestead can automate it. So in the end, I wonder why it's the comfortableness with MySQL. I don't know though,
Yeah, PHP still exists. Like,
Yeah, right. But like, look at JSON. I'm trying to get JSON querying out of MySQL. All exciting. It now works with 5.7, which I can't get to work on Travis or CodeShip. But I could have been using Postgres like how many years ago and having the same feature.
yeah, and the other thing that's crazy about MySQL is that they don't actually support UTF-8. You have to install a module to get emojis stored in text, which is like crazy. It's lying to you. MySQL lies to you. It says it's UTF, but it's not. You can't store emojis. Like, Postgres is just better. But, opinion, sorry.
So one of the things I'm just about to tweet out is Mike shared this link from this Anatoly developer. On GitHub, he has a package called nmig, N-M-I-G. I'll tweet it out for anybody who wants to check it out, but it looks like a MySQL to Postgres migration tool for through Node.js. Mike, have you used this?
Yeah, so I have a legacy project where this issue came into question. We were running hard against the limits on MySQL. Well, still are, unfortunately. But one of my plans was to migrate over to Postgres, and this tool does it. I mean, it ran 2 days and 3 nights, but it still did it in the end. The only problem I ran into is that the legacy database in MySQL had all the field names in camel case and wonky. Some were camel case, some were snake case, some were kebab case. It was just all over the place. And I was hoping it would have standardized it into snake case, but it didn't. So before running this tool, you have to make sure you standardize your field names and table names. But it does it. It creates an import file and populates a target database. No problem at all.
I'm going to have to check that out. One of the other things I was thinking about when, let's say, using the legacy database example, let's say we have a table with millions and millions of records and we want to optimize this. Curious what your guys' opinions are when it comes to optimizing, let's say, the table. Should we normalize it? Should we check that our indexes are working properly? What are some tips that work for you guys?
Indexes.
Explain. Use
Maybe,
the explain keyword. If you have your SQL statement and put explain in front of it, it'll tell you what you might want to even optimize.
Thank you. I was going to ask you to explain. That's pretty much it, right?
Oh, and Sean, by the way, I just Googled MMIG, and it's like the Marijuana Medical Investors Group. So, I don't know what that is all about. Oh, NMIG. Oh, well.
It's the node migration tool.
All right. I thought that was kind of funny. I was like,
That's why I said I put it on Twitter so you don't have to rely on my mumbling.
One more distraction, Twitter, then this, and then it'd be horrible. Well, one thing, I was listening to a YouTube video, I think by the people who do Craigslist, or one of those, but one good point is like we no longer have a LAMP stack or database stack, it's a multiple databases. And so when you start thinking about why is this table so big, a lot of these companies and places will archive their data in Mongo or NoSQL and get it out of the way, DynamoDB, and treat it that way. And so it's no longer, hey, this is my database. It's like, here are my databases. And so that could be part of the solution too. They all have so much. They all work really well, and there's a lot of wrappers where you can have that like kind of eloquent experience around them.
That's one thing though that I think the community could use some education on. Like, I mean, I think that's a great idea. I just don't have the experience with it, so that's why I never use it, and I never get to because I'm not exposed to it ever.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you're talking about taking some of the old data, archiving it into a NoSQL database,
Have Mongo run alongside Postgres, run alongside time series database, to totally optimize your queries depending on the use case.
Yep, yep.
So I'm just trying to understand. So you're talking about taking your Postgres, your MySQL, whatever database, converting it to, or sorry, taking the old data, archiving it into a NoSQL database, which it makes sense. But I've always feared fragmentation. So I'm assuming that the old data, you're moving it and then running the delete SQL command on that particular row. So if you don't have your your foreign keys, your cascading, all of that, if that's not set properly, it could fragment your database. Do you ever have concerns over that?
It makes sense. It makes sense. Craigslist was just talking about how they archive a lot of the old. I don't know how they do it, but like every month or whatever, their scheduled things are to say this is an old post, then they move it into Mongo or one of those databases, or this is an invoice. Someone bought something. Well, that's static data at that point. Let's move it out, and it's actually beneficial because if prices change, it doesn't change in that invoice and things like that. So it creates a historical record as well. As far as the foreign keys go, one of my struggles is we use UUIDs a lot, and I sometimes have trouble setting up those easily as foreign keys. It's still a struggle of mine for a lot of the apps, but
That sounds like a feature that could be implemented into Eloquent itself. That'd be pretty cool.
Which part? Which one?
Like saying when you're doing a migration, you just define that foreign key is going to be a UUID schema format.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure databases don't do that on their own right now. I assume that would be done at the application level.
It's a good point. Yeah.
Are you listening, Taylor?
How about any experiences on your guys' end with editing the MySQL configuration files or Postgres configuration? It's been a year or two since I've actually had to sit down and play with those values, and it's a very tedious process of trial and error. Have you guys done that before? Have you yielded great results, bad results, no results?
I cheat. I use AWS for everything. They just do everything, man. Once I got in there and got over the hurdle of like their abstraction of Linux and DevOps, I started to enjoy it.
I agree. I love AWS. You can just do everything. You're not limited to just a virtual server.
See, for me, I use AWS. I have two instances for my my personal business and my personal sites. I sometimes fear the cost, especially as someone who, like my personal business, makes no money. I suck, I know. My personal site, well, look at LaraChat. We're talking about $190,000 I don't have. I fear.
Yeah, but what is your fear? An EC2 has a fixed price. If you buy whatever, it's $20 a month, $10 a month. Depends on which one. It's fixed. Same with the database. You're not going to have these crazy things until you get into more dynamo or more scaling dynamic stuff.
That's a really good point, because my fear comes from when I set it up, I did not set that properly and ended up with a $200 bill. Stupidity on my part, fear had come from that.
It's intimidating.
It's set now. I have it set now.
No, like they have that stupid choose an M2 medium. It's like, what the hell is an M2 medium, right? if you find their pricing chart, they'll give you a sense of like this is X amount a second, or I forget the number, a minute. That's the math you need, and that will get you the number you need for that EC2. And just aim for EC2 that they write it down. They're like, this is a pretty standard one, 2 CPUs or one with decent memory, and you'll do pretty fine.
In your defense, though, Sean, the naming system is so strange. Like they couldn't just say, I don't know, like the name, like the individual acronyms for inside of EC2, and then you have to know what EC2 means versus the what's the CDN called? I forget right now. But there's just too many acronyms. They need to like chill on the acronyms a little bit.
It's CloudFront, isn't it? The CDN? Yeah, exactly. I just proved your point.
Yeah. There's just a lot of terminology that's AWS specific. They couldn't just call it like, this is our, I guess I see why they can't say like 2 core, because you can customize it. All right. Okay, I get it. Reason myself into it.
Mike, go ahead, Mike.
And I think, Dylan, you too mentioned last time that, or last time you were on, that Amazon is totally worth it. To me, I mean, I'm not questioning it. To me, the difficulty has been the learning curve. There are so many different services in Amazon. I'm like, why would I bother if Forge and Envoy does everything I need?
Because here's the problem. Forge, who's maintaining that server, right? Like there's so many variables you're not dealing with that you have to.
Right.
But I guess either way, you're going to have to deal with it. If it's on DigitalOcean or what, I don't know. And like, where's, like, RDS, spin up an RDS. Oh, click a button, now I have backups nightly. Oh, great. Want to recover it? Go recover it. My EC2 is not the right size. Click here, make a new instance. Like, but the learning curve is hard. I did Linux Academy for like 2 months and just went through their EC2 course, and it really helped a lot. Trying to click around and figure it all out, I wouldn't recommend.
Right. Yeah.
And I would also say it depends, because most web apps are not complex enough to even justify going from a DigitalOcean or a Linode or a Forge simple VPS service into a full-fledged, like, I need to separate my database layer, I need to have security groups, like...
I appreciate, like you're saying, I appreciate Forge and all it did for that. You're right. The simplicity of me spinning up something, yep. Yeah, totally.
And that's probably what I'm running into, is that most of my use cases, like 95%, are just simple CRUD-based web apps. Nothing really complex.
Well, that's good. You got a pretty sweet job. Some of us have like really complex, enterprisey kind of environment. Just depends. Every problem is different. Every web app is different.
See, I think can we hear me now?
Yeah,
Yay, okay.
What's up?
Anywho, so I think another major factor is consistency. I mean, Mike, most likely you're sticking to your solution because it works, and again, consistently you're dealing with the same type of stuff over and over again, so it just makes sense. Whereas I feel like when you take the leap into AWS, it kind of just is your new consistency. And you can, dish out an EC2 instance and slap together a quick little deployment of something in equally fast, or I don't know, faster, or in all probability equally fast to dishing out a new, droplet or whatever. And you're kind of just playing that game then, right? It's all your flow.
It's like moving from FTP and MAMP to Forge, and then now you're moving up to AWS.
Bingo, yeah. Same deal. Like, yeah. Because, I mean... there's so many things that I've done in the past, and it's like, oh God, why? Why was I ever?
Just a little, like, I was relying on Homestead for a long, long time to make virtual environments, and for Laravel it's great. And then a client needed a Drupal, like a custom Drupal thing. And I've never dealt with Drupal before, and I was like, shoot, I can't do Homestead. They don't have like everything set up properly, so I had to like sit down and learn Vagrant and Chef. And when I learned it, I was like, awesome, I can build anything now, not just for Laravel apps, but like, I don't know, once you get out of the comfort zone, you can start to do really cool things that, I mean, you're limited to the ecosystem you know now, but you don't realize what you can do once you start leaving it.
Well,
I'm curious about what you had to set up Drupal, but how come you couldn't use Homestead? To me, and again, this might be I might be naive on this part, but Homestead to me had PHP, MySQL, Nginx. It has your LAMP stack. What's different with Drupal? Or
It wasn't a technical requirement. It was the client. He wanted very specific versions, very specific groups already pre-set up, like much more customization than Homestead just gives you out of the box.
okay, that makes sense. I have a client who's using CentOS, so we have a CentOS vagrant specifically for them.
Right. And I can't say no. Like, I'll figure it out. Sure, you pay me. That's cool.
Yeah, pay me money. So I think we've covered the database topic. Well, there's so much to know about databases, but I think we covered a little bit about it and shared some cool tools and some feedback, pumping AWS's tires and whatnot. So I wanted to step into our second topic now that Matt is, he's here. I've got the lights turned out on me here. We'll deal with it. So Matt, now that your mic is working, our next topic was about Lumen, and this is one that you have some experience with. And so with Lumen, obviously a quick overview, the lighter microservice type of version of Laravel. It's not as full-featured, full-fledged, and I think some people get confused when navigating that jungle of why isn't this or that there. And so, Matt, what's your thought?
So for me, the biggest thing about Lumen, and there's lots about Lumen, but the main thing for me is that it's all in its name. It's a microservice architecture. So it's all about remaining small and building small things. It's not about making a lightning fast website. It's about building a small tool that does a specific tiny little job, very tiny. And when I say tiny, I mean you could dish out this tool and you don't even have to write doc blocks because it's so small and so easy to read. So the company that I work for during the day, our entire system is built on microservices. And when I say the entire system, I mean it's a handful of complex sites, but there are, I have no way of counting the amount of tiny microservices and then the Docker clusters and everything else that we spin up to run everything. So I mean, I'm still trying to piece together how our DevOps team does their magic because, as soon as they introduced me to Marathon and everything, I'm like, whoa, what? That's so over my head. However, again, my biggest thing is micro. It's not intended to be just a much faster Laravel. It's intended for small, fast, slap it together. It's a strictly REST thing or whatever. That's what I see it for. That's why I made Watts. I mean, that way you can just blast something together, or boom, done.
Yeah, I get the impression with what you're saying that you wouldn't use it in production. That's what I gathered.
No, you would use it in production. Would. Yeah, use it in production, but not like you're saying. Not as this isn't my website, and this is my thing that does a job.
A perfect example would be, so let's say you made a microservice that does just emails. So all its job is to ever do is send out emails. It might compile a little view and then it'll fire off the emails. And so that's an event-driven system. So it's literally sitting there listening. And I mean, at work, we often call them consumers. Its sole purpose is to sit there and consume the events as they're triggered. And so it might just sit there and it's listening and listening, and your giant Laravel app website is like, oh, send an email, and it'll just trigger the event, and then the consumer's like, haha, I've got it.
The acting is my favorite part. Love that.
So it's that's the thing, is like that email is a great example. A queue listening service that can just listen to queue jobs and process those jobs, which could be a bunch of emails. I wrote a little article about like Iron.io has. I wouldn't recommend Iron.io. I think they're good, but they have workers that can listen to queues and they spin up this zipped, lumen install, and that could process something off the queue. In my case, I forget what I did here. I did something with images. I converted images to ASCII something or something. I forget, right? But the point is, like, that's the one thing it did, and then when it was done, it put the results back on the queue, and it went back to sleep or whatever.
So, if I can interrupt,
Yeah.
Mike's got a little point here. Oh, I'm getting feedback.
No,
So Mike had a point in our little chat bar here. He's talking about how it's missing some of the features that he would have been accustomed to for API-driven things.
Yeah,
right?
but that's what you're saying. It's not API necessarily.
I think it can go either way. I mean, I'm like with Watts, right? I made it so that you can dish out a little CRUD inside it, and it just uses the validator, which is wrapped up, and it does it all for you. So you can.
What's the URL for Watts? What is that?
It's just on GitHub, but it'll be like GitHub/yabhq/Watts. Yeah.
What HQ?
Yab, YAB HQ/Watts. It's fine. I don't know if we want to tweet that out or not, but it's really simple. Like, I didn't do much of anything to Lumen. It's literally just sitting there to prep a handful of the stuff that's already ready to go inside Lumen, and then it's got the little CRUD builder, so you can have it that entire thing is just sitting there waiting for an API call of some sort. And because then you can build nice service layers inside your app, or you could do it the other way around. You could have it that you don't even bother with the URLs or anything else in your Lumen app. You can have it just be a service that listens for a queue, and you're done.
Yeah, or like Iron has push queues, so it's another good example of like you're saying. I mean, I get that. I guess what happens to me is when I try to use Lumen for an API, feature creep happens, and then we need facades, and then we need authentication, and then we need token base and OAuth, and by the time I'm done, I'm like, I just rebuilt Lumen, Laravel, right? But
Yeah.
when I use it for that thing that wakes up, gets a job off the queue, processes it, and goes back to sleep, it has no external communication coming to it except getting jobs from a queue, then I get it then.
I think Lumen's optimal use is in refactoring. I think you're gonna, generally speaking, when most people are developing something, you're gonna blast through, you're gonna build it all inside a single app as monolithic as it just becomes over time. But it's, your optimal solution, again, over time, is to then say, okay, well, what can I section out of this and spin off?
So you could build your app you're like, hey, I have this queue, this queue class that's listening for these emails, and then it takes them off the queue and does them. But then you're like, hey, now I'm ready to move that into a Lumen and put that Lumen off somewhere to be listening to that queue.
Yeah, and it can also, I think it can also be based on demand too. I mean, like the increase in demand on your application, you may actually need to splice things off and run those on separate, EC2 instances or whatever.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it could just get that your actual microservice needs to expand, but you don't want that to impact your overall architecture. And
yeah, well, it's not about Lumen at this point. It's about the design of microservices. And one other advantage is, like, you can put a new developer on that install and say, go fix this, and he or she's not like, where's the 20,000 bazillion lines of code? They're like, here's this one thing with this one queue listener, and they can work safely in that area.
I completely agree, except when, I'm sure Mike's going to mention this too, or maybe, I don't know, but the time where that can bite you in the ass is when you're dealing with a Docker cluster structure and your job is to make a small little consumer, and you're like, wait a minute, so this is connected to how many different things and needs to talk to 1,000 other services, and then you're trying to spin all those up in your cluster. You need to have good documentation when you get to that stage, to me. But that's just been my experience.
Yeah, one of the clients I'm working for is we have a container environment where everything's containerized, and we're trying to move to microservice architecture where everything we can bundle uniquely away is going to be its own little service. And we first tried to do it in Lumen, but we found there are too many missing features that we just needed to spin it up quickly. And so we ended up using Laravel anyway for everything. But we have lots of microservices now, and I don't think that's that much of a drawback. I mean, and that's a few milliseconds, a few hundred maybe.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. How much does it really add? Like, there's like 3 or 4 points of like, hey, how long does it take to spin up? How long does it take to take the request off the queue?
Right.
And how much is Laravel going to add to that? I think
the fight you have to get Lumen working is not worth it if you're not in a big enterprise environment where every millisecond counts. To me, at least, yeah.
No, it's interesting. It's a good point.
I like, for me, in all general sense, I tend to build everything with Laravel flat out. But if it's going to be something that I feel right off the bat is small enough that it can just be its own small running thing, then I'm usually like, okay, let's slap that together and watch. Especially like CLI tools, or like I use Lumen for all sorts of little CLI tools because it's so easy to whip it together, and I'm just done, right? I mean, I made a handful of little crawlers just using Lumen because it's like, oh well, boom, 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 done. And I like it for that sort of quick dish out something small use cases. But again, to me, it's about maintaining the mindset that it's a microservice, or it's a microservice infrastructure, or sorry, a microservice framework, which means it's not about loading 18 packages inside it, because you're just gonna it's gonna clump the whole thing up, and you've lost your speed advantage.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily dealing with a database, so it doesn't need the database structure. It's not dealing with authentication, so you're not worried about that. I can see all that adding up. I definitely can't see not needing facades, though, for the queue, but maybe for the command line stuff, yeah.
The other thing I also think it can be useful for, too, is it's because it's so similar, like you can have it running with Eloquent and everything else, that you could easily have it be a tool that manages a whole backup system for you and everything else, because it's the same familiarity of Laravel, except it's just small because it only has one job to do, again.
I've even used it in conjunction with Symfony apps, where it's just a simple data store that would be importing data, as well as the Symfony app could talk to it and query it, so that way the Symfony app does lessening the burden on the database, circling back to where we started, because you're doing more transactions on a different service, a different server altogether, which saves you a lot of processing power at the database level.
Yeah, like that's kind of how our whole system at work runs in its own ways. I mean, I can't go into any details of anything, and frankly, I don't even know half of what goes on, but yeah, we have, because like the other thing too is you can end up building your little Lumen instances so that it's like, oh well, this one only has read access or only has write access, and you can even limit the connection points on your database down to those and everything else, so you can significantly improve things. But again, I still think more often than not the most optimal time to to grab on Lumen or any of the microservice frameworks is when you're doing a refactoring of big things they're growing at a rate where you're going to need to pull off parts, right?
Yeah. The other kind of scary part is, like, when you create an app, you have an environment that you can package up to other developers. But when you start doing microservices, all of a sudden you have to have, when you spin up one microservice, what if it's dependent on another one running? Then you have to have both of them spun up in your environment locally, and they both have to be tested with suites that are synced up like code, but They're not actually version controlled together and it's under the same repo. So that's kind of scary. But, I mean, there's a case for everything.
And that gets more into design patterns at that point, and wondering why they depend on each other and things like that. And there's so many considerations at that point.
It's also the advantage of Docker. Side note.
One day. I'm on that list.
That should be a topic one day, because I'm still not sold on it.
I'm still kind of scratching away at it, but of the stuff I've been grasping, there's a lot of little parts that are making a lot of sense to me, and especially because of our work situation. Like, I literally couldn't comprehend how to do it any other way at this point, but we'll see.
So why don't we step into let's close this topic and step into the Q&A. We're coming up on the hour here, and we've got a couple questions. One from one of our loyal watchers, Eduardo. He wanted us to discuss a little bit about Google Cloud's BigQuery. I don't know if any of you guys have used that platform or not. I think that's the first question. Have you used it?
I have once, because I thought I had no. It's been around for a long time. It's that one, I think. There was one that I used at one point that I thought was gonna be something, and it was not what I thought it was, and I was like, whatever. I think that's the one though.
I'm gonna guess nobody else has any experience with it, so we don't really feel comfortable talking too much about it. I mean, I've used Google Cloud Services before. It was okay, I guess. One of the other questions was when it comes to large databases, do stored procedures, views, and triggers, do those help speed up the database, or is that more of a pattern to use for what you're trying to do? I'm curious who might have a thought on that.
You can't version control that. I do not like that. I'm not a fan.
Well,
but you need to.
That same legacy project I was working on, we have that, and I actually am shoehorning that versioning into the migration scripts to spin up and tear down the procedures and function calls.
So, sorry, you write raw SQL into the migrations
yes.
He's on?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. So you can version control that.
So I just put in like DB statement and then raw, whatever.
Oh.
In my migration scripts.
Yeah, but now you have two places to troubleshoot. I can't imagine the.
Well, the migration scripts only really come into effect when you're spinning up the instance.
No, just like when things don't work and you're like, okay, was it this class? Was it this code? Oh, it's the database, and it's something I did wrong there.
I guess, and I guess my process is I check the data first, and if the data's wrong, then I know where it is. The response I get back.
A typical Laravel developer would be like, "What is going on?" That'd be like the worst prank ever. If you wanted to like prank your coworker, like store a procedure via raw.
We had a query that I was troubleshooting with Matt just last week, and it took over 20 seconds to run a single query to get 580 records back. We optimized this into a procedure in MySQL that took it down to, without any filtering, took it down to 200 milliseconds. We added some where clauses, and it ended up being 2 seconds, but still, 90% improvement from the 20 seconds it was.
Maybe we've discovered a pattern here. Maybe there should be version control system that's specific for databases.
There are some. I swear I've seen one. I just can't. I can't remember the name, or even if it was something legit.
Well, the migration idea works. That's a good point with the putting it in migrations, and then it's version controlled and it's deployable and repeatable. It's a nice idea.
And plus, the same process can be used for, you have your initial data sets for your lookup tables and things like that you don't want to repopulate by hand every time. There's this package out there, and I forget who it is that I've used in the past, that turns your seeders makes them migratable, so you can roll back and do seeding in Laravel, the same way migrations work.
What was the name? Mike, I didn't catch the name.
I don't have it. I'll link it, then we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's a good one. That's interesting.
Awesome.
So one of the other questions we have here was when we were talking about Postgres, Eric Van Johnson missed if we had any good tool recommendation for administering Postgres, something like SQL Pro on the MySQL side. Any tools that you guys have used, the Postgres guys?
Well, I think SQL Pro will work for Postgres out of the box. I use Linux, so I use vStudio, and vStudio works with MySQL, regular SQL, Postgres. I think most DBMS systems work out of the box with Postgres. Like, I haven't been on a Mac in a while. I couldn't tell you about SQL Pro specifically.
I know back in the day we used, and again I'm forgetting the name of this one, but it was like phpMyAdmin, but a Postgres version. So that had to be all set up in the browser, and I think most of us want a standalone app. Like SQL Pro is amazing, so I'm going to check it out to see if I can actually connect to a Postgres database via SQL Pro.
And do not ever put anything like phpAdmin on a server, please.
What year is it?
I was looking for a good Postgres client, and I came across Querious, Querious, because SQL Pro won't work.
Well, I'm proven wrong. That's good to know.
Put a link in the notes. That'd be nice to see.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. But on that note,
whoa. The one that I've been using, I've been trying to remember, and I couldn't. PG Commander for Mac. PG Commander was what I was using for a little crawler I had, and that thing it's the same feel of, like, UI-wise, it's kind of similar to SQL Pro, but it's a little wonkier in kind of how you have to work with it. Mostly, I think that's Postgres' fault, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, PG Commander, Killian on our LaraChat Slack forum, he suggested PG Admin, and I recognize that name. I feel like I've used it before, but again, it's been a little while. So some interesting tools that we can use for Postgres, and thus making it more of a reason why we should use Postgres over MySQL for Alfred, make Alfred happy. One of the tools I wanted to give a shout out to was RoboMongo. If you're ever using Mongo databases, I've used RoboMongo, and I'm happy with it so far.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's a really good idea to try Mongo too. I know as I build applications in the business doesn't really know what they want. If you go too much into relational databases, it's hard to refactor. In Flex with their change, but start off with Mongo or JSON fields, you can really restructure quickly as the business figures out what they really want. It's really nice. I should try Mongo.
Yeah, the way I use it on one of my apps is I have anything that I need that's relational is in the SQL side, MySQL, sorry, Alfred. It's on the MySQL side, so I can have the relational data, but anything that was non-relational, I store it in the Mongo database, and it was a big JSON string of all the data, which worked fantastic for storing it and retrieving it nice and fast. Question from Juan1791, is Lumen good for beginners?
No. My gut reaction is no, because you have to hook up so much on your own.
Well, I would say because the documentation is lacking.
That too, yeah. I would say no.
I agree with the documentation. Totally agree with the documentation. I do think, given that Lumen has a limited number of components to it, I think you could, if you're a newer, Laravel ecosystem developer, you could kind of grab onto it and be like, if you kind of look, even just looking at the bootstrap file, you kind of like, oh, I can roughly get this, maybe.
See, my fear with that is if you're new and you're using Lumen and you Google or search for a topic of, but all you can find is Laravel examples, and they're not going to work in Lumen. I can't think of a specific example for this, but I fear that for a new developer trying something that in Stack Overflow it doesn't say Laravel or Lumen, but the code looks similar, and then it doesn't work, and you're wondering what's going on here. Laravel or Lumen sucks because it doesn't work. Scary thought in that regard, in my opinion.
I would recommend to buy a book. It's the best $20 you'll ever spend, and just go through it, chapter by chapter, like Code Smart or Code Bright. It's one of those Laravel books that are written by really smart people, and they'll explain it in human terms that maybe sometimes documentation could be a little bit too advanced when you're right off the bat.
But really smart people that aren't on this show.
Not yet. Wait till you get like 200,000 users.
Fair enough. But I think those are all of our questions for today. We covered large databases and Lumen. We had a late start. Thank you to Matt and his audio issues. So for that, we'll be fining him a maximum of $50 for insubordination.
190,000 actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, not for the big debt under the bill, right?
And one of the things we talked about was having our website redone. We're working on it. Life and work gets in the way. We'll have a new logo, a new website. We've got a whole bunch of prizes and stuff that we had lined up, and we've just honestly, I've dropped the ball on this. So trying to get that going again, and we'll get some prizes out to people. We've got all these GitHub accounts that we need to get away and get back onto. So bear with us, guys and girls. We'll get that going again. In the meantime, Alfred, thank you for coming on. Dylan, thank you too for sharing your knowledge. And of course, Matt and Mike are always here. Maybe their mics work, maybe they don't, but they're here. Riz was away today, so we'll hopefully have him next week. And as always, we're always open to topics, guests, ideas. Shout them out in our Slack channel, and if the live channel is #live. Join us in there, and if you want to be on, let us know. We'll have you on. I mean, we've got Alfred and Dylan here. I mean, we can do better, right?
The bar is so low.
So again, thank you everybody who's watched, and have a great night, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. See you guys.
Good night.